Hi everyone, Neko from Popcorn Sunday Animation here with another pixel art tutorial. If you're new to this series, you might want to check out the previous video, Where the Heck is That Button? In it, I show you how to set up your tools for creating pixel art in 3 different art programs. However, if you already know how to make a 1-pixel brush and an eraser without anti-aliasing, then you're all set to follow along with today's lesson. I'm going to start by showing you how to make a classic RPG overworld map. If you're not familiar with the term overworld, that's just the screen you'd see when you're adventuring around between towns and dungeons in an old school RPG. If you're new to pixel art, an overworld map is a great place to start. That's because it's less detailed than, say, a boss battle screen, and pretty much all the design elements are repeated. So for instance, you only have to draw one mountain, and then you can just copy and paste it to make a whole mountain range. So let's get started. You always want to start with a sketch. If your drawing skills aren't the best, that's okay. In fact, it might even work in your favor. You don't want to get too detailed with it at this point. And as you can see, I've kept mine pretty basic. This is just going to be a roadmap of what you need to make and where it'll go on screen. When I'm designing anything, I always like to start with pencil and paper. I learned the hard way that I tend to get artist block if I try to start on the computer right away. Once we have a rough sketch, we'll need to figure out what size our world, aka our canvas, will be. This is an extremely important step because you'll be creating all the art at the pixel level. Let's see what size it is right now. Yeah, this thing is huge. As you can see, working at this size, we end up with a ton of pixels we'd have to paint in. I'd never be able to finish it this way, and what's worse, I'd end up putting in a lot of unnecessary detail. Smaller is usually better, but you want to be careful to give yourself enough pixels to work with so you can put in all the details you want. You can see that when I scale it down too much, I don't even have enough information left from my sketch to draw anything. So, how the heck are we supposed to figure out what size we need? What I ended up doing was I determined what size I wanted the sprites, aka characters, to be, and I resized my map accordingly. I had to do a fair bit of research to figure out what some of the common sprite sizes were for games of that generation, so I'll save you the hassle. The most common sizes are 8 by 8, 16 by 16, 32 by 32, and 64 by 64. You can see in this graphic the relative difference in both size and amount of detail you can fit in. At 8 by 8, I actually had to redraw the tree completely because when I shrunk it down, it turned into this unrecognizable pixel blob. Any of these sizes would be fine, it just depends on how much detail you feel like putting in. I decided to go with 32 pixels by 32 pixels since I want it to be a little bit nicer looking, but I also need to get it done relatively quickly. I actually had one of the characters done ahead of time because I needed it for a proof of concept, so I'm using that to determine my size. He was made for the battle screen, so that's why he's not in the correct perspective for the map and also a bit tall at 32 by 64 pixels. But he'll do well enough to give me a rough idea. I'll just copy and paste him on the map, and we can see already that the map is too big. So I'll undo, drop the size, and paste him again. We can tell that it's too small because he's too large in relation to the background. I'm really just playing around and trying different sizes until I find something I'm happy with. That looks good, so we'll go with that. If you're starting from scratch and need a jumping off point, I'd recommend going for a standard def TV resolution such as 640 by 480 or 1024 by 576. So I'm just starting out with the pencil tool set at 1 pixel and doing a basic outline of the tree based on the information in the sketch. I can always go back and refine it later, so I'm just trying to get a general outline put in. Then I'll go ahead and fill the whole thing in with color. I know I can paint bucket it, but sometimes I like just filling it in 1 pixel at a time with the pencil tool. I don't know why, I just do. So then I'll double click on my color swatch in the lower left hand corner, change that to a brown, and draw in my tree trunk. I think it needs a little bit of like some roots right here. So I'll put those in. Now, as you can see, it looks pretty basic at this point. It's just flat color. It has no kind of depth or dimension to it whatsoever. So I'll pick a lighter color of green and start going back in and giving it some highlight areas. I've just sort of pushing and pulling areas of color to see what looks good. So I'll put in a little green and then I'll put in a little of the dark green and just kind of go back and forth. So I've got a nice little trick here for finding the midtones. I sampled the lightest color and then I turned the opacity down to about 50% on my pencil and started laying it in. That gives me a tone that's basically halfway between the light green and the dark green. So then I'll just once again take the eyedropper tool by hitting I, sample the color, and use that for all of my midtones. Now I'm just going back in, once again, just pushing and pulling color areas until I get something that I'm happy with. This is, of course, sped up about 5 times normal speed, because I know you do not have all day to sit here and watch me draw a tree. So now I've got my tree to a place where I'm generally pretty happy with it. And that's when I notice a problem. I drew this whole thing on my background layer. That's going to cause me problems in a lot of different ways, largely because I won't be able to duplicate this tree and it's just stuck onto the background. But this gives me a great opportunity to show you how to fix that. You'll see that I took the lasso tool and outlined the tree. Then I just cut it out using Command or Control X and pasted it on another layer. That way, all I have to do is erase the extra little bits of background around it, and I keep my whole tree. I went ahead and made a layer of purple. That way I can make sure that I've completely erased the background. Now, as you can see, the tree is there on its own, and I didn't have to go back through and redraw everything. So now I'm just going to hit Control J or Command J to duplicate the tree. And then I can just use the Move tool to select each tree and move them around. Give myself a big group of trees here, Shift click, and move that over. And then I can just select the trees one at a time and start to position them around the map, just however they look good to start to build out my forest. So now I'm going to start on the mountains. Of course, I'll make sure to save my work first. And you'll notice that I am taking time to name my layers. Making a map like this is going to generate a ton of layers, so you're going to drive yourself crazy if you don't name them appropriately. Because if you need to go back and change something, you're never going to be able to find that layer unless it's named. So here's a little trick that I think is kind of helpful. I realized that I wanted to make my mountain symmetrical. So what I did was I just used the marquee tool to select and copy the side of the mountain that I liked. I erased the other side, then pasted that part of the mountain. Then I went to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal to flip it to the other direction, and just merged both of the layers, and then Control T to free transform it just to widen it out a little bit till it looked good. Okay, so I'm going to interrupt the drawing for a moment here to bring you a little bit of a PSA. Reference. I cannot stress enough how important it is for you as an artist to use reference. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? Other artists have come before you. They've tackled these same problems. It's important to look at how they solved these problems. You know, in my case, I was really struggling with getting the mountains to look the way that I wanted them to. So I just went online. I started looking up RPGs that I liked, that I knew had great mountains, and just started saving the images into a reference folder for myself. So then I can pull them into my software and just have them on hand to refer to as inspiration. I'm certainly not advocating plagiarism. Don't go and just retrace the mountain pixel for pixel. You're not going to learn anything that way. But studying other people's art, seeing what techniques they use to solve these artistic problems, that's how you learn and grow and get better as an artist. have had so many students come to me and say that they hate using reference because they feel like it's somehow cheating. It's not cheating to use reference. It's cheating if you directly trace something and call it your own, yes. But looking at reference is how artists study. It's how we learn and become better. So whenever you're starting a new art project, take 5-10 minutes to find some reference to inspire you. I guarantee that will save you stumbling around in the dark trying to guess your way into a solution. Okay, PSA over. Coming back to the mountain, I really liked how they dealt with having this directional shading. So this is me just going back in with a really dark color and starting to emulate that. Putting in a dark brown outline on the side of the mountain and then coming in with some nice dark shadows. Now you'll see that I'm using that opacity drop trick to find a nice medium brown to add a little bit of highlight to the opposite side of the mountain. And I'm just kind of moving the pixels around. I really am just painting with pixels at this point, just adding some color, removing some color until I get a result that I feel looks good. So as you can see, it's a little bit of looking at reference and a little bit of trial and error. So now for the top of the mountain, once again, inspired by what they did in Final Fantasy IV, I really loved how they had kind of the snowy top to the mountain. I thought that looked cool. So I'm just going in with a light blue to do the outline. By the way, anytime you're doing shading on white, it's always a better idea to use blue instead of gray. It just gives it a little bit brighter, nicer look. If you do gray shadows on white, a lot of times it can look kind of dingy and dirty. So you'll see I've got some blue shading in. I'm just going in and experimenting around then with doing a little bit darker blue outline on the snow cap. And just going back to using, once again, the trick of dropping the opacity and painting a little bit of one color over the other to find a mid-tone that I'm happy with for the shading on the top of the mountain. And now that I've arrived at something that I like, once again, I'm just using Control J or Command J to duplicate the layer. And I'm just grabbing those layers and laying them out how I like. If this were me creating tiles for an actual retro RPG, I'd actually want to create a repeating tile set that fit together. But because I'm really just faking the look of a retro RPG background to be used in animation, I can use this trick and save myself a lot of time. So here's a fun trick for when you need to fill in a large area with a texture. So you can see I have this big area of yellow for the desert that I want to give a sand texture to. So instead of freehanding it, since I already know my tile size, I can actually just make one tile and repeat it across the whole thing. So you'll see that my height and width are set as 32 pixels, and I'm just going to make a brand new document, sample the base color of the sand, and then on a new layer, just paint bucket fill that in. Then I can take a little bit darker color. And one thing I could do is just start making a whole bunch of random dots across the tile. But I pretty quickly realized that doing it this way was slow and the results were kind of unfortunate. There's actually a faster way to do it just using one of the brush settings. I'm going to start by making a new layer. So I have a base layer, and then I have a second layer that's just going to be the sand texture. Of course, don't forget to save your work as you go. So now I'm going to go into the brushes palette. And of course, if you can't find that, just look in Windows and look for brushes. And I'm going to turn on scattering and just start playing around with the settings in there until I get a nice random scatter of dots. So yeah, that's looking pretty good. I think I'll take off the count jitter and just go with the scattering jitter. So as you can see, this is going to give me a really nice spread of random dots without the time that it would take to actually put these in one pixel at a time. Now I'll just take a little bit of a lighter color and lay down another layer of dots. That looks pretty good, but I want to play around with giving it a little more complexity. So I'm going to make another layer. The reason why I'm doing another layer is since I'm already pretty happy with the first layer, I don't want to mess that up. So using a separate layer, I can experiment around with adding more details or more colors or whatever I want. And if I don't like how it looks, I can just delete that whole layer and still have what I started off with. So I'm pretty happy with this, but I want to give it just a little bit more depth. And to do that, I'm going to start playing around with the layer blend modes. You can see that that's just that little drop down in your layers panel. And basically it just determines how one layer interacts with the layer below it. So I'm going to do screen for that topmost layer. And then I really liked how multiply looked for the other layer. And I'm going to leave my base layer alone. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm just going to merge everything down, copy it, and paste it on my map. Now I'll get that positioned up in the corner and then just keep copy, pasting, positioning until I get myself a nice little field of tiles. Then to save myself some time and sanity, I'm going to select all of these, merge them into one, so now I can just Control J to duplicate layers, and I have a little bit bigger of an area to copy paste. So I'll just do that until I fill up this whole area. As you can see, I'm not at all worried about it going beyond my border. That's because of the next trick. You'll see that I've merged all of my sand into one. Now I'm going to copy that yellow tone on the layer below it and apply a layer mask. So that keeps my sand texture from going outside the boundary of the desert. Much faster and easier than just painting everything in by hand. And it gives a really nice look, I think. You'll notice that it looks very repetitive right now. For what I'm doing, I honestly want that repetitive look. If you didn't want that, you could always make a tile that repeats seamlessly. So that's really it for making the overworld map. It's just these couple basic techniques that I used on everything. Most of the icons, I just lay in my flat tones and then go in with either a highlight or a shadow tone to start to define my shape a little bit more, and then come back in using the trick of dropping my brush opacity. I can get a nice mid-tone layered in as well, and then I just duplicate those. For anything where I wanted a random but repeating pattern, I just make a tile and repeat it and use masks to keep it within the boundaries that I need. Yeah, that's it. Hopefully you found this a little bit helpful or informative. Certainly if you have any questions or you want to show off the overworld map that you made, please leave a comment below. Also, coming up here, I think I want to get away from the pixel art and start doing some tutorials over different animation techniques. So if there's any animation technique or software that you've been interested in learning more about, please leave a suggestion in the comments for what I could work on next. I'd love to hear from you. So yeah, that's it. I will see you next time. Bye.